Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be something a little different than what I normally do, where instead of focusing on personal modding projects, I wanted to show a peek behind the curtain at how cutscenes are set up. As you probably saw in the title, I applied this analysis across the board for all video game cutscenes, but I'm focusing mainly on Halo when showing off for two reasons. One, I have access to the tools to break the camera free and show things from a different angle, and two, I know the tools incredibly well to where I can actually understand what's going on with this setup and try to explain as we go along. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get into the video. The first of two cutscenes I'll be looking at today is one of my favorites, and the reason I actually wanted to make this video, that is the introduction cutscene to Halo 3 ODST, titled Prepare to Drop. One of the first things you'll notice is how the characters appear and disappear only as they're needed. Basically what's happening here is every camera change is a new scene, and every scene references a specific set of actors. Each actor has a reference set up to their animations needed for that specific scene, and when they're not in the camera shot anymore, they're unloaded from the game until needed again. It's a smart optimization for the Xbox 360 era, where the scenes can focus only on what actors are needed for the moment, and dedicate remaining resources towards things like depth of field, improved lighting, and general clarity. On the topic of improved lighting, you'll see in this scene with Buck and Dare how they have spotlight lighting. Similar to a live performance, such as a high school play or even something on Broadway, there's light focused on the characters main to the scene. You'll see as Buck moves around, the light follows him, casting real-time shadows on the ground and creating an overall softer, more realistic lighting across his face compared to something you would see in-game while playing. Since Bungie-era Halo games used baked lighting, this saved them from having to add unnecessary details specific to the cutscene level, and instead basically attach a moving light to characters as they speak and illuminate them only as necessary, saving time for level designers to work elsewhere in the game. As you may have seen in previous sections as I've been talking, there are some odd-looking moments in the animations when pulling the camera back. In this scene, you can see Romeo sitting on the weapons bench but being clipped into the bench itself. Previously, you also saw Dare come floating down the hallway with no real animations, or Buck zipping back and forth while talking, sometimes floating a few feet above the ground. This shows the main advantage of digital movie making compared to real life, where if the designers need a specific angle or location for their shot, they're not limited by the laws of physics by dangling an actor 5 feet above the ground or clipping them into geometry. Instead, they can create an animation, forcing the actor to be wherever they need, allowing the perfect shot to be created. Now, we can see how Bungie created an interactive cinematic moment. As you can see, the body of our character is now fully rendered, but we're missing a head where the camera is attached to. However, there's also a much more interesting moment here, and the main trick that caught my eye, making me want to make this video. You can see Buck and Dare appear in the screens, giving us briefings in their own drop pods. However, pulling the camera away shows the most hilarious discovery I found, and that is that Bungie's designers basically crammed both characters' bodies into your drop pod, distorting and breaking their bodies so they can give us a mission briefing. I'll discuss this in the next cinematic I show, but Bungie had a trick in previous games using something called a texture camera, projecting a view from elsewhere in the level to a surface near the player, and I always assumed it was something similar to this for these. But this is, at its core, the epitome of clever camera tricks to convince the players of a more coherent cinematic scene. As the pods drop in-game, we're given a beautifully constructed scene showing us passing through cloud layers and debris, the space elevator in the background as we hurtle towards the Earth's surface. You can also see that, since the scene is on a fixed rail, the scene behind the player was never created, nor needed, and it allowed only half the skybox to be focused on for creation and full detail. As the pod reaches the first thick layer of clouds, the game briefly flashes white and loads us into a new zone. However, what I'd like to point out is the creative use of limited level space. Bungie essentially used the full vertical capabilities of the level for the drop sequence, quickly loaded in a new skybox, and brought the player back to the top of the map where we began the drop. This creates the illusion of a much higher drop distance while condensing two separate areas into a similarly spaced map size. Custom lighting, camera tricks, broken bodies, and reused map sections, all working in harmony to create a unified experience for one of the most amazing and entrancing cinematics I've ever seen. It's always been one of my favorites, and while seeing behind the scenes break some of the illusions, it also helps draw a complete picture to me on how Bungie employees were experts at their craft. The second and final cinematic I wanted to look at was Crow's Nest from Halo 3. This starts off with similar tricks you recently saw in the ODST level, with the Pelican suddenly shifting position, showing a distinct moment where each camera cut happens. As the actors appear, they shift and are given special lighting for their voice lines, disappearing again as they finish speaking. You can see Miranda Keyes enters the scene with an early animation, and while she's off camera, her animations are slowed to a crawl before rapidly speeding up and catching up to where she needs to be, walking down the stairs to greet the Chief and Arbiter. As you'll see, Bungie's designers kept only certain parts of the map loaded for the cinematic, reusing this one random hallway for a brief moment before cutting to the main location this cutscene takes place in the command center. You can see in this hallway that Bungie stopped the camera from progressing too far, showing the Marines running with the gurney around the corner before exiting off camera again, while the area just beyond the door remains unloaded and unrendered, again showcasing optimizations made to only create and show exactly what is needed in this given scene. As the characters begin moving away, we hard cut once again to the command center where the rest of this cutscene takes place, but where some little tricks still happen that paint a larger picture than what really exists. This section begins fairly standard with Miranda, Chief, and Arbiter walking down the stairs, an occasional lone Marine in the background as characters are rendered and unrendered based on their inclusion within the scene. Where this becomes interesting is when Lord Hood is introduced on the big screen. I mentioned briefly earlier, but Halo 2 and Halo 3 use a trick called a texture camera, where a surface's textures are replaced by a live video feed from elsewhere within the loaded map. In this section, you can see that Lord Hood is speaking from the deck of his starship, when in reality there is a simple little floating box where this all exists just outside of the window. However, this quickly becomes confusing because it appears as if Bungie created a section for this cutscene moment to exist underneath the map, seemingly midway through production, because the area Lord Hood is speaking from suddenly moves from one of these little 2 squares buried deep under the command center. As this section of the cinematic wraps up, Lord Hood gets interrupted mid-sentence and a sudden power outage hits. Since the map's lights are baked, what Bungie most likely did here was heavily reduce the lighting on the player's screen, similar to how they quickly dim the lights later in the level, and added a higher level intensity light on the actors in the scene for this section. As the Prophet of Truth comes on screen, we can now see that the second square under the map now has Truth rendered and animating within it, with the texture camera's positions now located here pointing at the Prophet as he speaks to our heroes. The tricks being used here should be familiar if you've watched this far in the video, with lighting being added or removed based on the character speaking, most characters being unrendered while not in focus, and the use of the texture camera while the Prophet of Truth is on the video feed. What's amazing to see for me as I pull the camera back is to see how incredibly advanced the lighting was for this game. Keep in mind, this game came out in 2007, and this isn't a remaster. It's allowed to natively run at higher resolutions than the original 640p on the Xbox 360, sure, but everything set up was so incredibly well future-proof that it still looks amazing today. Although in-game couldn't handle real-time shadows yet, it's amazing to see how crisp the characters look, how soft the shadows are while still being defined, and how amazing the light looks while cascading over the character's skin and armor. The use of bump maps, although using tiny details, pop in these cinematics, showing little scrapes and bumps, showing shadows within the armor pieces glowing on Chief's visor, and the intensity fading as you move farther from the character in focus. It makes me wish we had the capability to tap into these details in-game using mods, to create a full real-time lighting using these cinematic lights in-game, to create depth of field specific to where you're aiming as the player, or in general to enhance the light being used against characters and see more distinct details in-game. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed watching that, and that gives you a little more appreciation when watching in-game cinematics, and to understand why these can potentially be so much more powerful long-term than a pre-rendered cutscene. Please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment if you enjoyed this, and if you have any other cinematics you'd like to see broken down, please leave those in a comment as well. If you'd like to donate to my Patreon to help fund more of this type of content, there's a link in the description, and you can, of course, find all my Halo mods in the Steam Workshop, also linked in the description. Thank you for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time.